Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast. This is your host, Mike Higman. I've got Adam on the line with me. This intro is going to be a little bit shorter than usual, and if you listen to the prior episode, you'll know why. Is that Southern?
You nailed it.
Anyway, this intro is going to be a little bit shorter, but we do have an awesome guest. We've got Dr. Bob Sheppard, and I think I said this at the beginning of the podcast, but I read his book 3-4 years ago, and it made a huge impact in just the way I thought about hunting. I think all the listeners, you guys are going to love this episode. The beginning of the episode is a little bit slow to get going, and the reason is because I'm starting this crap over.
You're just nailing it.
I was going to leave that in there, but man, I am just going to leave this in here. This is solid gold comedy right here.
We are so tired of doing all this editing, man. You just roll with it.
Whatever solid gold comedy is. Is that a 80s thing?
Some like Chevy Chase stuff there.
Anyway, so Dr. Sheppard, it was a little bit slow to get going. And the reason is because he has a ton of data and research in his book. And basically, he's got to explain why his findings are legit to get started. So if you're one of those people like Adam that delete a podcast after listening to the first 5 minutes because you think it's boring, don't do it on this one.
It's literally like spitting through a class, and it's really good. It gets really, really good in my opinion. And Dr. Bob is someone I could sit there and listen to for hours if he could just keep punching in with questions.
Yeah, it is. So let's go ahead and get into it. And if this is something you enjoy, let us know. Hit us up on social media or send us an email. Find our houses and tell us in person. But let us know if you like this, because I think he's somebody that we'd probably like to have back on the show. So give us your feedback and let us know what you think. So let's go ahead and get him online. All right, we've got Dr. Bob Sheppard on the line with us today, and I just want to tell you how I'm familiar with him. About 3 or 4 years ago, I read his book, Whitetails, a research-driven hunting model, and it started to really change a lot about the way I thought about hunting. Probably until that point, I was thought of things along the lines more of what you see on TV, and started to really get my gears turning as far as how I should be doing things differently. And when we started this podcast, Dr. Sheppard was one of the first people I thought of as to who I'd like to get on, just because he's got some different ideas. And, what we like a lot is it's research backed. It's not just a lot of, I feel this or I saw this one time. He's got hours and hours of data behind it. So, Dr. Sheppard, could you just kind of give us an idea of how you got started hunting and what your background is and maybe how you got involved with writing a book?
I'd be happy to. It's a long story, obviously. It's been about 40 years that I've been whitetail hunting, and that all started basically with bow hunting. I helped teach a series of bow hunting schools in commercial lodges around the country, predominantly the southeastern U.S. And with that, gradually learned a little more, and basically over many years, 20, 25 of those years, I just became more and more frustrated. In other words, I took a lot of animals simply because I was in the woods a gazillion hours, and learned by the sweat of the brow, which means you basically tend to end up learning more things wrong than you do right, and you don't know it. You can't figure why you're successful because you go out, climb a tree, become successful, but for the wrong reasons. And then you draw the conclusion of, oh, well, that's why I was successful, and it turned out that's not why you were successful. You were just blind lucky. And so many years of that just kind of caused me to become more and more frustrated. And so I had a relationship, because I'd been an outdoor writer for 30 plus years. I was an OWAA member for a long time and SEOPA member for a long time. Matter of fact, I was a medical director for SEOPA for a long time. But anyway, finally gave that up. because of what you said earlier, and that is we tend in this industry to just sort of keep publishing the same old hash all the time without really ever putting any real data into it. So because of a relationship teaching these bow hunting schools for commercial lodges around the South, I developed a relationship with some of those folks and began to realize, what I need to do is take some component of hunting and try to figure what could I do to analyze that information and gather it in a systematic way to try to add some real data, not just opinion based upon going hunting, but rather some real data to that picture of why deer get up and walk around in the daytime, which, of course, those are the ones we are limited to hunting. And so in doing that, I decided to contact the NOAA Weather Radio Service to see if there was any way we could get at the data that they have about weather, because I suspected, just because of a lot of hunting experience, just time in the woods, that weather affected daytime deer movement. And so that sort of became my focus, was to try to take weather patterns and try to make some sense out of when is a good day to go deer hunting, when is a good day to have deer get up and walk around in the daytime. And I had my own preconceived opinions, biases about what that might be and what the data might show. Things like, for example, moon phase. What effect does moon phase really have on a deer's likelihood of getting up and walking around in the daytime? And there's a plethora of data published out there, but it's all basically opinion based upon individual hunters' experiences. And I suspected that what we thought might be wrong, but I just didn't have any way to prove it. So examples like that, I got together with one of the big commercial hunting lodges, Bent Creek Lodge, down in Choctaw County in west central Alabama. It has about 43,000 acres that they've managed for 30-something years now. I got together with them early on when they were first few years they were open, and I had learned to program computers because of I wrote a medical education program, and then later converted that to a computerized medical records program. Learned to work with databases and statistical analysis software, and I put together a piece of software that would allow us to capture the NOAA Weather Service database each day at a specific time, I think we set it up at 12:15 every day. And we would download this data and get the weather data. In other words, we had multiple pieces of data, like for that particular day at that particular time. We had wind velocity, wind direction, barometric pressure, cloud cover, rain, the amount of rain source, etc. So this lodge puts out about 25 hunters every morning and 25 hunters every afternoon. And then the lodge in the evening hours of the day would take those hunters' information down in terms of what they saw and obviously what they killed. So that allowed us to develop a database that had 50 hunter days, figuring a hunter day as 5 hours in the morning and 5 hours in the afternoons, that we could store in this database and then match up that data with the weather information. With that, over a period of 20 some odd years, we developed a database with some 100,000 hunter days worth of information in it. And with that, we were then able to do a statistical analysis that would allow us to take not only a univariate approach, in other words, just taking one item like wind velocity, or wind direction, or temperature, or change in temperature, or barometric pressure, any one of multiple pieces of data. We could take one piece of data and hold all the others constant and then develop a statistical model that would allow us to say there is a 45% chance that this particular factor has a causative effect on the likelihood of a deer getting up and walking around in the daytime, meaning he got killed or he got seen by one of these hunters. With that database, we were able to statistically analyze individual pieces of the weather to develop basically a hypothesis of what specific weather patterns are best for a hunter to get up and go deer hunting. And what came of that what came out of that model was what I wrote the book about. And that is, let's just break it down this way. Let's say if you could pick 3 components of the weather for a given day and know with some certainty that if I've got a day that has these 3 characteristics to it, I have a 6-fold increase in the likelihood of being able to see and or take an animal. Would that be useful? Well, of course it would. But nobody has that.
Well, Dr. Bob, I think we've got people really interested in what those findings that you were able to put in the book were. But I want to jump back a little bit before we give that to people. We'll let the suspense build a little bit. Can you tell me a little about your personal hunting history as far as how you got into hunting? And also, I know your book says you've killed a lot of deer in your day, and I'd love to hear about if you have an updated number on that, and maybe how those numbers came about, how you were able to hunt so much and be so successful.
Yeah, I wish I'd never published those numbers. I got more hate mail about that than probably anything else in the book. And
well, maybe you don't have to tell us what that number is, but I can tell you it was a lot of deer.
I would just say, obviously I've hunted a lot over 40 years and taken a great deal of animals, and I'm glad of that. I don't apologize for it. I enjoyed it. It was well within the law. I'm not an illegal shooter. I stayed within the limits in our state. It was just that I started hunting in the late 1960s in Alabama, when Alabama did not have a very big deer herd, but it grew rapidly. And from the 1965 to 1985, that 20-year period, Alabama's deer herd got huge. It got to be close to 2 million animals. And we went from a period in the early 50s, when there were no deer in Alabama, to a point where we had beginning to get too many. And the state Department of Natural Resources, Game and Fish Commission, began to encourage hunting clubs and individuals to take more and more and more does out of our herd, because we were beginning to press the environment in terms of carrying capacity. Well, I just simply happened to be a young physician with a lot of time on my hands and the resources to hunt a lot. And so I was hunting in a place that had a long hunting season, 111 days, and a very liberal bag limit. We could kill 2 deer a day every day for 111 days or so if you count the bow season. And then later black powder got added to that, and then they pushed it out and began to allow us to hunt even some into February. So we had a very liberal bag limit, and I had a big hunting club area, close to 30,000 acres. And so the biologists were telling us, you got to kill more does, you got to kill more does. Well, we were hammering them. We were trying to kill as many as we could in response to the Game and Fish Commission's efforts to make sure the state didn't get badly populated. In fact, they did, and in some areas began to have die-offs. So it was not unusual for one of us that bow hunted and gun hunted to be able to take, 40, 50, 60 deer a season. And so with that came a great deal of just simply in the woods experience, taking animals. Wasn't it we were trying to kill everything that moved? We were just simply trying to keep the herd under control. And so in doing so, I did not really realize at the time that we were in Alabama in a very unusual circumstance, and I, as an individual, was in an odd circumstance where I was able to gain experience at a pace far beyond what most people, most people's reality was. For example, I give you an example. One year at one of our bow hunting schools, I made a statement to a group of bow hunters. I said, look, guys, don't go out there and limit yourself to be a trophy hunter when you first start trying to bow hunt. It's hard enough as it is. What you need to do is take a few animals to get some experience, to learn how to to execute that last 30 seconds when you make that move to draw. It's so hard on pulling that off on a whitetail. You ought to kill 15 or 20 does before you try to limit yourself to a buck only. You ought to kill 40, 50 does before you limit yourself to try to be a trophy hunter. Otherwise, you're just going to run the deer off when you finally get that moment to arrive. And one of the hunters stopped me and said, Dr. Bob, I don't understand. In my state out west, we only get 2 tags, and one of those can be a doe and one can be a buck. How am I going to ever get enough experience? I just sort of stopped and said, if I were in your shoes, I'd move. So that's what I mean by an unusual piece of experience, that I was just in the right place at the right time. It was not that I was that great a hunter. There were other people that were hunting with me in the same area that were killing just as many deer as I was. So I never perceived myself as being a spectacular whitetail hunter. I was just simply in the right place at the right time. So that piece of backdrop is sort of where this book came from. After 40 years of that, my children began, as they got grown and left the house, they began to say, Dad, hunting may well disappear in our generation in America. There's a lot of hostility toward it right now, and hunters like you that have had this kind of experience are not very common, and not many of you out there. And if hunting disappears from the landscape, this information that you take for granted is going to disappear with you. And so you need to write a book, and you need to put the information down so that young hunters for another generation or two, hopefully, will have the option of learning from someone who's actually done it, who's actually been out there enough to amass a body of information that most people will never be exposed to simply because they don't have the opportunity.
Well, I'm glad your kids convinced you to write it, because like I said, it did have an impact on me, and I'm sure there's others like it. And hopefully the information you share here as well, with some new technology, we've got new ways to get information out there. So I think we've let everybody wait long enough now. Maybe you could start getting into some of that data that you were able to pull out in some of your findings.
Okay, I'll take 1 negative and 3 positives. In other words, we got 20 some odd pieces of weather data to try to analyze. We're not going to get through that. So let's just take first one that I was personally wrong on, even after 20 years of a lot of hunting experience. I had made the assumption that the moon phase had an impact on a deer's likelihood of getting up and walking around in the daytime. And I had made the assumption, based upon my experience, that if you had a bright moon phase, in other words, a moon phase that was not only bright, say half moon to a full moon in that range, but that bright moon phase was up during the nighttime hours, then the following day would be a terrible day to deer hunt. Deer, we thought, fed through the night on that bright moon phase and therefore didn't have the inclination to get up and walk around much during the daytime hours the following day. Well, the first 2 hunting seasons that we gathered data for this research project, that is exactly what happened. In other words, when we looked at the statistical likelihood of a deer being seen or killed on those days that followed the bright moon phase nights, the data was like fourfold or so as likely to be able to kill a deer on the days that followed dark moon phase than bright moon phase. So that fit my thoughts. That fit what my experience had told me. The problem is that the next 2 years, year 3 and year 4 in the database, showed exactly the opposite results. In other words, they showed that deer, the statistical likelihood of being able to see or take a deer on a day following a bright moon phase was actually greater than on the dark moon phase, just the opposite of what we had thought from those first 2 years worth of data. So, and it was just nothing I could do to make that go away. It was like the data said, this is the truth for 2 years, and then the next 2 years it said just the opposite. So we didn't have enough data in the database at that time to do a multivariate analysis of the data rather than a univariate. In other words, that a multivariate analysis allows you to take a single component of the database and say, I'm going to look at the statistical causality of that particular piece of data, but I'm going to hold all these other 19 variables constant and then see what the results are in terms of causality that come out of that particular single piece of data. Well, it takes a huge database with many tens of thousands of data elements to be able to do that. So it took some time. It took several more years for us to get enough data, statistically significant analysis done on a multivariate analysis instead of a univariate analysis. And when we did, what we found was that the statistical likelihood of the moon phase having an effect on a deer's likelihood of walking around in the daytime and getting seen and or killed turned out to be purely just trial and error. It turned out to be not a causality, but rather just a data element that happened to line up at times and happened not to line up at other times. So my conclusion after 20 years of doing that kind of data collection is that the moon phase simply doesn't matter. It does not have a cause and effect relationship with respect to deer getting up and walking around in the daytime. And I know I'm gonna get blasted from people who swear that that's not the case. They know better. Okay, that's fine. I just, I've looked at deer that have been radio tracked and seen some of the studies that don't necessarily agree with what I've said. But I'm confident enough that it changed my own personal view of when I hunt and when I don't hunt. What the other three pieces of data are really, I think, more important. And that is, if you could just simply say, well, I want to go hunting Saturday, that is going to be day after tomorrow. And in doing so, I'd like my odds of being able to see and or kill something be as high as possible. What kind of weather pattern would give me good odds of being able to have my odds be as high as possible? And I think that would surprise most hunters. Number one, the single most important piece of weather data that you can know in terms of helping you be able to have high odds of hunting success is change in temperature. Not absolute temperature, but change in temperature. In other words, what I mean by that is 40-degree weather in Alabama is better hunting weather than 60-degree weather. But what is just as important as the absolute temperature is the change in temperature. In other words, for example, if you took a 40-degree day that was in the middle of a 10-day period where the temperature stayed 40 degrees every day, each passing day shows a decrease decrease in daytime deer activity. However, if you have a day where the temperature is 40 degrees and yesterday it was 70 degrees, that day is your highest statistical likelihood of seeing a deer walk around in the daytime, and therefore obviously be successful. So watching for those kind of weather patterns just simply formed the basis of how and when I hunt now. I just simply look at a day when I potentially might be off work and can go hunting and say to myself, okay, I'm going to go hunting day after tomorrow if, and that if is hinging upon the temperature. If the temperature is not cold, I don't go, period. The statistical odds of taking a trophy animal in warm weather in the winter in Alabama is so close to zero, it is not worth the trouble to go. And I love to hunt. I mean, I for many years, I just simply went every time I got off work. It didn't matter if it was, 6 times a week, I went hunting. It didn't matter what the weather was doing. And gradually I began to realize not only was I not going to be successful on those warm days, but I was going to make my odds for killing something on the cold day decrease because I muddied up the area with my human scent. So staying out of the woods and then picking and choosing your day to hunt very carefully based upon for sure the absolute temperature, and if you can, the change in temperature would dramatically increase your likelihood of being able to take an animal when you do go hunting.
I think this might be a good time to offshoot real quick. I think one thing, this is actually the thing that changed my thinking the most out of reading your book. Could you tell us your thoughts on hunting stands multiple times and what you see there?
Yeah, that has nothing to do, so to speak, with weather. So the weather basis is the basis of the most of what I had to say in the book. But that answer to that question is one of the, if I had to pick 10 things that made the most difference, I would put temperature number 1, or to put change in temperature number 1, cloud cover number 2, or lack thereof, and wind velocity is number 3. Number 4 would be what you just said, and that is not overhunting a good spot. In other words, what I want to try to do is not overhunt a spot. So just how important do I think that is? It is so important that with respect to bow hunting, if I go to a particular tree and climb that tree and hunt it on a given day, with that day having been chosen based upon the weather for that particular day being ideal, if I'm unsuccessful, I don't go to that place again for the entire season. If I kill a deer, I don't go there again. If I don't kill a deer, I still don't go there again. In other words, I think that overhunting is so bad, it has such a negative impact on the likelihood of being able to take a deer from that spot that I don't go to that tree again. Now, I may not move but 100 yards off in a different direction, but I won't hunt that particular tree again for an entire season, an entire year, in other words. I realize that's being fanatical. It probably don't have to be that picky about it, but I get to hunt a big area, 6,000 acres, and so I can move around a lot and not have to worry about hunting the same place. Some people don't have that option, and so if you got 40 acres to hunt, well, I realize you're going to have to hunt one place more than one time a hunting season, or you won't go hunting very many times. So I understand those points and those criticisms, but I'm just saying, if you want to keep your odds as high as you can get them, hunt when it's cold, clear, and windy. And when you hunt when it's cold, clear, and windy, hunt your best spot for that particular day, and then don't go back there again, or don't go back there at least till some time has passed. Because as time passes from the first time you hunt a spot, your odds of taking an animal, particularly an older age class animal, in that spot goes down dramatically with each passing day. Each time you hunt that spot, your odds drop. So leave it alone. Don't overhunt your good spots, and pick and choose to when you hunt those good spots based upon the ideal weather pattern.
So I think that puts it in good perspective as to why you wouldn't hunt those days when the weather's not right, because you're burning one of your spots that you're not going to get a chance to go back to later.
Yeah, you might another part of that, another answer to that question, and it's kind of coming from a different tangent, is why is that so? Why does that seem to have such an impact on the deer when you go up a tree? If you're not there that night when that deer walks around, how does he know you've been there? Well, of course, the answer is because he can smell a whole lot better than you and I can. And when he smells where you have been up and down that tree and left your scent on the ground around it, he doesn't run off and blow and snort and make a scene. He just simply intuitively, as a part of his neurological fabric. I don't think it's abstract thinking on the part of the deer. It's just he's hardwired to be able to take that information and say, oh, that means danger. Don't come here again. And so he'll just simply avoid that spot for weeks after you have left your scent there. Now, I understand that if you hunt in a place where the hunting pressure is not very great, that deer begin to do dumb things and don't seem to, they will make that mistake of coming through when you've just hunted there before. Or you might have been lucky enough that deer happened not to have come through that particular spot since the last time you hunted there. But again, I'm all about playing odds, keeping your odds as high as you can get them. When you can eliminate a factor as being an obstacle to being successful, eliminate it. Do what you can to keep your odds stacked as high as you can get them.
So you quickly went over the three factors. I know you touched on one of them was wind was a good thing. How much wind is a good thing?
Okay. Yeah, I said a cold, clear, windy day was the key. So I put wind number 3. Do I really think it's number 3? No, I think it's number 2, and it's a close second to temperature. So this was a surprise to me personally. I thought that an excellent day to deer hunt before I did this research would have been a cold, cloudy, rainy day with wind velocities in the 5 to 10 mile per hour range. In other words, if you want to take virtually no wind, calm, and wind 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then 15 miles per hour and greater. If you broke it into those three categories, I thought that middle category of wind, say from 5 to 12, 5 to 10 miles per hour, somewhere in that range, was sort of the ideal. What our data indicated from having all these hunters hunt for all these years, 20 years, and then capturing what they both saw. They could lie to you about what they saw, but they can't lie to you about what they killed. And the kill data tracked the sighting data perfectly. So I think the hunters were more or less telling us the truth in terms of what they saw. And what that showed us is that the highest sighting kill days, both for young animals and older age class animals, were days that were exceedingly windy. I just found that to be a surprise. I thought 35 mile per hour freezing northwest wind day would have not been a particularly good day. I was under the impression from my hunting experience that when the wind really gets high velocity, the deer just simply shut down again. They curb their daytime deer movement. That turned out to be just simply dead wrong. And so I wondered, well, why? Why is it that we as hunters gain the perspective from our own experience that says that's not the case? And I think the answer came down to to just common sense. If you've got a 35 mile per hour wind in 17-degree weather, how long can you stay in a tree?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my answer to that in Alabama with the best clothes I could afford is about 2 hours. Well, if you're not out there, you're not going to see anything. And so I think what happens is it is so uncomfortable to hunt under those high velocity, very cold weather conditions that we never amass much hunting experience under those conditions. And so we draw the conclusion that they're not good hunting days, when in truth, they really are good hunting days. They're just terribly uncomfortable, and we tend to climb down and walk around and do something different. And so we're not there when the success could have been enjoyed.
What would you consider a significant temperature drop? And when you say temperature change, I know you're talking about
I'm talking about
drop.
Alabama conditions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm talking about drops. Basically it's a linear relationship. The more it drops, the better it is. I give you an example. Weather pattern changes in Alabama in the southeast tend to change from the southwest toward the northeast. In other words, most of our weather fronts move from the Texas, Louisiana area up across Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, and then into Alabama. And so they come from that direction. So a typical example would be that if it's been 70 degrees for the last week in Alabama, and it rains on a Wednesday, as that rain blows in, you're going to have a south, southeast, southwest wind, somewhere toward the south because it'll be warm. As the rain begins to drop off, the wind will gradually shift to that southwest direction, and from there to the west, and then from there on around to the northwest through the night. And as that all occurs over a 12-hour period of time, the temperature starts to plummet, so that by the following morning, the temperature may have dropped 30 degrees, and you got a pretty brisk northwest wind blowing. The key time to hunt is that first few hours after daylight, when that wind gets around to the northwest and temperatures dropped 20 to 30 degrees. So if you had the front come through and the temperature only dropped 5 degrees, that's not as good as if it dropped 20 degrees. If it dropped 40 degrees, that's even better. So the more of a temperature change you get in the downward direction, the higher and higher the statistical odds are the following day to be able to take a deer. The second day after that front blows through and the temperature drops, even though the temperature may be the same as it was on the day after the storm, that day is not as good as the day immediately following the storm. Hunting before the storm, say after the rain, but when it's blustery and still warm, is awful hunting. The statistical likelihood on that day is terrible. So you want to be on the backside of the weather pattern change, not on the front side.
I think that's really interesting, because I think conventional wisdom is you hunt both sides of the front is usually,
yep, exactly. You couldn't be more wrong. It just won't work.
So Adam, I have the benefit of knowing all the answers before I'm asking these questions, but I know a lot of this is new to you. Do you have any thoughts or questions so far?
The question I have right now is, you put these in order, and I think you said wind was number 2, maybe followed behind cold. Was clear, just a clear day, number 1?
Yeah. No, a clear day is not number 1.
Okay.
The temperature is the most important. That's number 1. Number 2 is the wind velocity. The higher, the better. And number 3 is the tendency toward clear weather. In other words, to me, I thought, you just think about deer or nocturnal animals. Why would they not like a overcast, rainy, dark day? That seemed to me, just common sense would suggest that should cause them to be more comfortable and they might get up and walk around better in the daytime. It turns out that's just simply backwards wrong. What they like, it seems, in terms of getting up and walking around, is they like a day that is clear. Well, that just surprised me. I wouldn't have thought that. So clear is better than cloudy. Cloudy is better than rain. And rain is the worst situation you could be in. Having said that, I would not hesitate at all to go hunting on a very cold, very windy, but rainy day. That's why I put rain versus clear as number 3 on the list of most important weather patterns rather than number 2 or number 1. That makes sense?
It did, and that's kind of what I thought you said, but I guess I got it mixed up. I was thinking for some reason you'd put clear as number 1. I thought, man, I want to ask him, get deeper into that reason. So anyways, thank you.
I think you remembered it correctly. I used the term cold, clear, windy. So I did put wind number 3 when I stated it that way, but I didn't mean to convey that. So the way I should have said it, I should have said the best day to hunt is a cold, windy, clear day.
Okay, so we've covered when the best time to hunt would be. Can you, and I know this could take an hour in itself, so maybe we'll just have to summarize here, but can you kind of give us an idea of where to hunt and how your stand sites are set up? Because it sounds like you've got a lot of different sites that are set up, and you're doing a lot of, I'm assuming, mobile hunting. Can you give us an idea how you choose your sets and get set up?
Yes. I am a very mobile hunter. I tend to move constantly from one trip to the next. So how do I do that? In other words, what determines on a given day where I will hunt? You've heard what determines whether I will hunt or not. The weather patterns determine whether I hunt, and for the most part, the temperature. But temperature, clear versus rainy, and windy, those 3 factors are going to determine whether I hunt on a given day. Where I hunt is determined by the wind direction. You might say, well, gee whiz, I don't understand. How is it that wind direction would determine? Well, might you guess that if the wind's out of the south, southeast, southwest, straight south, that it's likely to be warm? So do I hunt anywhere when the wind's southeast? No. I'll fish or squirrel hunt or do something else or work. I just simply avoid going to the woods when the wind is out of the south, simply because it's warm, not because there's anything inherently wrong with a southeast or a southwest or a south wind. So in the early years, I'll put it this way, I kept a database of 3x5 index card in 2 shoeboxes under my bed. And on each of those index cards was written several pieces of data. Number 1 was wind direction. So in other words, northeast, north, and northwest were my 3 directions that I kept data on. And so if I were looking at going hunting tomorrow morning and I looked at the weather channel or weather radio, that's how I was doing it in the 1960s, I'd look at the weather, listen to the weather radio, and if the weather radio said tomorrow is going to be a northwest wind, then I would go to my database, pull out all the cards that had stand sites, hunting spots that would be best hunted with a northwest wind. Then those became the options from which I chose for that day. And if I had, 12 places that I could effectively hunt with a northwest wind, I would pick out one of those based upon several other pieces of data that were written on those index cards. They were things like, is this bow hunting or is it gun hunting? Is it hunting over a food source or is it hunting a bottleneck? Is it hunting during the rut, or is it hunting during the late season? Those kinds of pieces of data would help me stratify those northwest wind direction spots so that at a given point in the season I could choose effectively which one of those northwest wind sites to hunt. So it was wind direction that determines where I hunt and weather patterns that determine whether I hunt.
What's interesting is that, so when I read your book, it was my first year, I believe, hunting a piece of public land that was the closest one I could find to my house. Basically kind of self-taught, taking up information wherever I could get it. And this is the one thing that where you talked about hunting the north winds the most that really messed me up, because this public land, I always entered from the north end heading south. And when I read your book, I was thinking, I can't use that entire area now because of going there. And without disagreeing with anything you're saying, the way I look at it now is I've got very limited days that I can hunt. And I basically, I'll have, stand sites for all wind directions because, I've got a 3-4 hour drive usually to hunt. So if I'm going to hunt, it doesn't matter what the weather is or that kind of stuff. So I try to set up for everything. But that is one thing when I first read the book was it really changed, kind of blew my mind, like, oh man, this whole entire area that I've been looking at, I can't even use.
It absolutely does. I'll put it this way. I mean, I'll explain the way my hunting club was set up. I tell you, I had 6,000 acres in our leases together, and there's 6 of us in the club. That meant we could basically have 1,000 acres each. When I set the club up, I said, guys, this is going to be a benevolent dictatorship. The lease is in my name. Therefore, I'm going to make the rules. If you want to stay in the club, you have to go by my rules. And here's the rules. We're going to break this 6,000 acres up into 6 1,000-acre blocks. And so during the course of the hunting season, I don't want you guys in my 1,000 acres, and I'm not going to set foot in your 1,000 acres. We'll plant together. We'll work the roads together. We'll do the clubhouse work together. But when it comes hunting season, we separate out so that I could have 1,000 acres that I could not have to question whether somebody had been in a spot ahead of me the day before or the week before. And in doing so, I would keep my odds as high as possible. Of course, they fussed bitterly about that and said, oh, no, we can't do that because you'll pick the best 1,000 acres and we'll be stuck with what's left. So I said, well, no, that's not where I'm headed at all. I think overhunting spots or hunting spots under the wrong conditions or hunting spots when the wind is southeast when it should be northwest, you guys won't pay attention to those things as carefully as I will, so I don't want you in my spot. So here's what we'll do. We'll break it into 6 components, 6 sections, and I'll let you guys pick the first 5, and I'll take whatever's left. And then we'll see how the hunting success goes through the season. Well, I did that for several years and let them choose that they hunt. They'd swap every year because they'd always sure somebody else got a better deal than they did. And I took 80+% of the animals that were taken out of wherever I was hunting. Well, it wasn't that I was a better hunter than they were or a better shooter. It's just that I was playing those odds when they were not. I was keeping the odds stacked in my favor so that when I did go hunting, the odds were as high as you could get them. That's what I mean by, playing the statistics on your side all the time.
What kind of tree stands do you use or setups do you use with moving around so much?
It's unusual, but the style stand that it is, and I've been hunting out of it for 40 years, it is a sling type stand. Anderson's tree sling was the original version. I ran into Jeff Anderson, the guy who designed it, bow hunting for bear in Canada one year in a hunting camp, and got a copy of his, and it was the most uncomfortable thing I'd ever sat in. but it was light, portable, compact, easy to put up and down. And so I basically made some alterations in that tree sling. The Anderson tree sling was basically made out of seatbelt webbing. And when you sat down in it, it would just squeeze your legs and your butt to the nth degree. The heavier you were, the more it sort of would bind you. So I put a wood seat inside the webbing and made a kind of a home fabricated stand out of that. And then from the contact points where it's tied off to the tree, I monkeyed with that mechanism a lot over the years and gradually changed it and made it, more comfortable. And that tree sling model where you're basically sitting facing the tree and you got your feet on two steps that at the top of wherever how high you climb. I don't tend to climb very high. I hunt about 12 to 15 feet. And so this allows you to basically stay behind the tree, and the animal is not nearly as likely to see you when you're behind the tree instead of sticking out in front of it. You're just not as obvious to the animal when he approaches your spot. That's the kind of tree stand I use.
So I don't know if you Googled that, Mike, but I did, and that is a saddle, basically.
It is called a saddle stand. If you Google saddle stand, you should come up with the name of this stand that's built by a guy over in eastern Mississippi.
We actually just had an interview with the guy who primarily hunts out of a saddle, and then we also just interviewed John Eberhardt, who also primarily hunts out of a saddle. It seems like, I think they're kind of having a resurgence right now, or even just becoming more popular. I'm seeing more and more hunters say that's the way that they've decided to go, just because it's so portable and so lightweight, and gives them so many options as far as what kind of tree you're in and that kind of stuff. How do you actually climb the tree using the saddle?
I've tried everything, and nothing works well. What I finally settled on is a combination of two things. One is an Easy Climb brand name, Easy Climb, E-Z-C-L-I-M-B, Easy Climb screw-in step that I use a 10-inch piece of Schedule 40 PVC pipe to slip over the end of the step and use it as the leverage to turn the step. So the combination of having that 10-inch piece of PVC to give you enough leverage to be able to turn the step, and that screw-in Easy Climb step is one where the screw-in part of it kind of folds rather than being a fixed step. So the screw-in steps have just sort of been the standard for the last 25 years, I guess.
Do you prep all your stand sites before the season starts?
I'd never go to a spot I'm going to hunt within a few months of when I'm going to hunt there.
Okay.
In other words, yes, I prep a spot. I go to a lot of trouble to clean up a spot and have it ready to hunt. But I do that in March, April, May, say during the turkey season, not in August, September, October, coming up on the hunting season. I want there to be no evidence that a human has been in that area for weeks, if not months, before I'm actually going to hunt there. So I try to avoid going into the woods. And that brings us to a subject that I did not cover in the book that I have an opinion about, and that is game cameras. I think game cameras are one of those technological inventions in recent years that really adds a new, exciting, fun aspect to hunting that I have virtually no experience with. And if I did, I'd be at a real quandary as to what to do about it, because I don't like going to a spot I'm going to hunt, like I say, leading up to the hunting season. But if you put a camera out there, you about got to do that. You got to go check it. And that just violates my very nature when I think about having to go into a spot where I'm going to hunt to check the game camera.
a lot of hunters have switched to the strategy of they use the information the next year for that very reason, where
I
they
think
don't want to ruin their spots.
That's probably what I would end up doing, because it would be just such a mentally difficult decision for me to make. I think I'd probably, wait and see what. I'd just hunt through that season blind and see what it showed the following year.
Now, typically when you're hunting, you're not targeting specific deer.
That is right. I hunt patterns. And I would, there's a gazillion details like this, as you know, that I covered in the book, but I give you an example. I virtually never hunt over food. And then you say, well, gee whiz, how do you hunt without hunting over food? I mean, that makes up 90% of where most people hunt. And if you did, why? Why would you not hunt over food? And the answer is, where do the deer spend their daytime hours? They spend their daytime hours in the concealment of a thicket somewhere. Where do they spend their nighttime hours? Eating over food. How do they get from where they are in the daytime to where they are at night? They travel. So if you're going to hunt, do you want to be at the last place that the deer is going to get to in the daytime hours? Or do you want to be near the first place that he gets up to walk in the afternoon or comes back to in the morning? And so the answer is, obviously, you want to be closest to where the deer is, not where he's going to be. So I don't hunt over scrapes and rubs for the same reason, because that's where deer tend to make those things in the nighttime hours for the most part. And so if they eat, say, over acorn flats or over food in a field in the nighttime, I want to be off in the direction of where the bedding source is, not where the feeding source is. I want to cut them off between the two, but I want my tree stand to be as close to where they are in the daytime as possible, so that in the late afternoon, when they get up and start to walk, the young deer are going to get up and start to walk first. They're going to come by you first, then the middle-aged deer next, and then the older age class deer last. I want to be as close to where they are in the daytime so that when they come by me, it's still daylight, and I haven't gotten down and gone home to eat supper.
What terrain features are you looking at to dictate where you would hang those stands and those travel routes?
Yeah, absolutely. That probably is the most important thing to know about where I hunt. Not whether I hunt, or when I hunt, but where I hunt. That spot has got to be able to be approached from a south direction and hunted with a north wind. But what are the characteristics that actually make up that spot? I would say that the single most important feature that I look for is a bottleneck. Now, remember me talking about the 6,000 acres and each of us getting one 1,000 acre section? I mean, if you had the luxury of being able to have 1,000 acres to yourself, I realize I'm lucky with that respect. If you could have that, how many outstanding bottleneck spots do you think there would be in a typical 1,000-acre block of timberland? Well, it's a heck of a lot fewer than you would think. There are from 1 to 3, seldom more than that. So what is the next best thing to look for other than a bottleneck? Well, the answer is half a bottleneck. Well, what is half of a bottleneck? A half of a bottleneck is a point. So if we say, well, what would be an example of a bottleneck? Well, an example of a bottleneck could be a place where a lake makes a point off of one of its areas with, the lake's, say, shaped like a leaf. Each of those points becomes half of a bottleneck. So if you had 2 lakes, one coming from one direction, one coming from the other direction, and they got within 50 yards of each other, then you have a bottleneck between those 2 bodies of water. So that's an example of what a bottleneck might be. Well, a point is just simply half of that bottleneck. And so those bottlenecks and points tend to be the kind of ground feature, ground cover that will funnel deer movement. They will just simply move through that area as a matter of fact to avoid having to swim the lake. Now, they'll swim the lake if a dog or a coyote or something gets after them. It's not that they're afraid of the water, but if they're just meandering in a typical feeding pattern, they will tend to skirt the edges of that water, and those points and or bottlenecks become high odds places. Those are where I hunt. I don't hunt over food, and when I do hunt, I want to be in a bottleneck. So would I want to be in a bottleneck where the deer movement moves through the bottleneck east to west or north to south? Well, the answer is east to west. Do I want to approach it from the north or from the south? Well, I want to approach it from the south so that my scent is constantly being blown perpendicular to the direction of the deer movement.
Do you find any patterns with deer either moving, trying to move into the wind or the wind to their advantage, or do you think they're typically just headed to a destination?
A lot of disagreement about that. I've known some excellent hunters over the years that believe that deer have the innate intellectual, brain-driven capacity to know which way the wind direction is and to use that to their advantage. I do not buy that in the least. I think deer get up and walk wherever they want to go, and it is the ground cover and terrain features that determines where they'd walk, not the wind direction. I think they pay zero attention. I don't even think they have the capacity mentally to acknowledge or understand that the wind is blowing toward them or not blowing toward them. In other words, if I have a deer coming toward me and the wind is obviously going to be blowing in my face if I've set up the way I usually do, then what happens if I make a sudden movement and he catches, when he's still out there 50, 60, 70 yards away, and I'm not going to get drawn on him for several more minutes. What if he gets kind of spooky? What does he do? He puts his nose in the air and starts trying to smell. Well, if he knew the wind was coming from behind him, he'd have sense enough not to do that. He'd have sense enough to realize something's wrong here. So what does he do? He circles you. Is he circling you because he has the intellectual capacity to understand that he needs to get on the other side to be able to smell you? No. He's circling you just simply avoiding you. Whether he circles you to the right or to the left doesn't matter. It's the terrain features that will determine that. I'll put it another way. I always hunt with the wind in my face. If the only deer movement of the particularly older age class animals was from the south towards the north, in other words, that's when it's cold, then I'd never kill anything because the deer would always be coming from behind me. But the ones I kill by far and away are the ones who approach me from the north or the east or the west, not from the south. So just simply because of by the very mechanism that I choose a spot to hunt, I'm going to set up in such a way that the only deer I'm going to see are the ones that are walking with the wind, not the ones that are walking with the wind in their face. I never see those deer. They come from behind me, and of course they smell me before they get there. So no, I'm not at all convinced that deer have the ability to distinguish which way the wind's blowing. I think they just simply walk where they want to go, and they're careful on the way. But I may be wrong.
Do you practice any type of scent control?
None. I don't know if it works. I've tried it many times. I've never been able to convince myself it makes one bit of difference. That's just one of those things I don't worry about. I walk into the wind, go into the place I'm going to hunt. I keep the wind in my face when I get there, and I hunt with a north wind of some sort, north, northeast, northwest. Those. I mean, if I listed 50 things that are details like that you and I could pay attention to. The top things on that list would be things like the temperature. 2 would be the wind velocity. 3 would be the lack of cloud cover. In other words, a cold, clear, windy day. Number next is when's the last time that spot was hunted. Next would be what kind of position is it? Is it a bow stand or a gun stand? Next would be how frequent, how likely is it that somebody else may have hunted this area? Those are the kinds of things that would determine where I hunt, not things like moon phase, not things like what kind of stand I hunt out of, whether I shoot a recurve or a compound, whether I shoot a heavyweight or a lightweight, whether I shoot broadheads or fixed broadheads or scissor broadheads and so forth. Those things to me are minor points. They don't make nearly the difference. If you get in the right place under the right conditions, you will become successful. No matter what kind of gun you shoot, no matter what kind of bow you shoot, those are the really important details.
Dr. Bob, I've got to cut out, unfortunately, to a parent-teacher meeting, and I'm hoping you can stay on and talk to Adam a little bit longer. I want to ask you one last question. I'm hoping you talk to Adam longer because I'm actually excited to hear this keep going later. I'll listen back. But given the amount of deer you killed and just your style of hunting, it doesn't sound like you're necessarily a trophy hunter per se, but are there times that you'd be hunting like a specific mature deer and try to hunt the same deer over and over where you're kind of hopping around looking for that deer? Or
No.
were all your sets kind of just based solely on whatever comes, I might shoot it?
I'm not a trophy hunter. You're exactly right about that. And no, I hunt spots, not deer. I choose my place to hunt based upon those characteristics I just gave you, not because I know there's a particularly big deer in that particular region. I just simply hunt the places with those characteristics in mind rather than the deer itself. My areas of hunting are so big that if 99.9% of the bucks that I kill, big bucks, trophy and what I would consider a trophy animal, I've never seen them before. That's the only time I ever see them is when they walk up on me and I stick them with an arrow. So it would be unusual for me to kill a buck that I knew was there because I just simply don't see them very often in the woods until I've executed that moment. When they do arrive, I'm ready.
We were talking about terrain earlier, and I'm reading this book right now, Mapping Trophy Whitetails, and I can't remember the author's name, but in his book, he talks a lot about saddles, and I've hunted saddles through the years, and I've kind of had a challenge with wind in saddles, but I always see a ton of deer, and it's really challenging to bow hunt them. Do you key in on saddle hunting? And if so, how do you play the wind in that situation?
I couldn't agree more. I agree with the saddles. I don't have a lot of them on the areas where I hunt. This part of Alabama tends to be fairly flat. For example, a ridge where I hunt is a place where water does not stand after a flood.
Oh, no. Wow, that's pretty flat.
So, that is flat. So only time I hunt saddles is when I'm off onto somebody else's property in another state or somewhere far away from this region in Alabama where I predominantly hunt. But my experience with it is just exactly what you just said, and that is that I get deer that are clearly fixing to come through the saddle, and that I'm in the right place at the right time, and then they smell me. And so I've gradually over the years quit trying to hunt saddles except under one set of conditions, and that is cold, clear, windy day in the mornings, so that thermals tend to cause your scent to rise in the morning, and it tends to drop in the afternoon. So it is next to impossible, it seems to me, to get a deer close to you and in a situation in the afternoon part of the day. So I tend kind of limit my huntings of a saddle to the morning hours.
Well, that was kind of a selfish question, because whenever I look at a topographical map, and I live in very hilly terrain here in Middle Tennessee, and the first thing I'm looking for is I'm circling the saddles, because deer will go through there. It's just a matter of how to keep from getting winded has been my issue and concern. So I'm always trying to look, okay, can I hunt this bench off to the side of it, or which way are they going to enter into this, and in different ways. But yeah, I appreciate that. And Mike had another question he wanted me to ask, and he said in the book you told a story about shooting a doe first, then a buck. And I think he alluded to like a larger buck, that you would rather shoot a doe than a 10-point buck, something along those lines.
No, that's close, but not quite. It is true that I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool trophy hunter, but I can assure you, you will not find a hunter anywhere in America when he walks into my house and sees the trophies that I've killed, many, 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 many dozens of them, they will be impressed. So I'm not saying that I don't trophy hunt. If I get the opportunity, I do not cull trophies. But when I'm bow hunting, I shoot the first animal that shows up that's legal. If it's a doe, so be it. But I knock another arrow and get ready, because when you kill that doe, you have not decreased your likelihood of killing a trophy animal an hour later. So I stay ready. I've got the confidence to stay there and to keep waiting, because I know if the conditions are good for that doe to have showed up, the buck will show up later. But he will be later. He won't be the first animal through in all likelihood. So in a place like Alabama, where there's a huge deer herd, a dense population, you just simply got to deal with the does. They're going to come through, so if they're going to come through and smell you when they get behind you anyway, go ahead and kill her. They eat as well or better than the bucks do anyway. And so if you, by your standards of, in other words, if you, to keep your deer herd controlled, if you need to kill 8 does in a hunting season, go ahead and shoot the doe. Don't worry about messing up your buck hunt by shooting a doe early in the afternoon or middle of the afternoon, or late afternoon for that matter. I can't begin to tell you the really nice whitetail bucks that I've taken when I could barely get another arrow knocked in time after I just shot a doe. So, that's a misconception that a lot of people don't realize. If you're in a good place under the right conditions, play it out to the last minute. Kill the first animal that comes by, and then wait for the buck, and when he shows up, shoot him as well.
That's pretty good advice. A lot of these years I'll go in bow season, I'm like, well, it's too hot to shoot a doe just yet. And then when it gets to November, I'm like, well, I don't want to mess up my buck hunting. And so I like that. I think I might take that approach.
Yeah. It just keep sitting there with the confidence that if that doe showed up, that she showed up for a reason. The conditions were good for her to move. They're good for a buck to move. And it's true that the buck's going to be more cautious, and the older they are, the more cautious they become. But just because the doe showed up, don't worry about that. Her running off out there and making a ruckus and all when she falls down and starts kicking. That is zero concern in terms of a buck that may be standing 100 yards away. He hears the noise, I'm sure, but he is not afraid of those kinds of sounds. Now, you make a metallic sound with your tree stand, and he'll avoid you like the plague. But animals make these kinds of noises all the time in the woods. Does chase and claw at each other, and fawns are running and breakneck speed, just because they're playing like kids. That kind of noise is going on all the time in the woods, and the bucks virtually pay no attention to it, in my guesstimate.
The last question that I'd like to ask is, do you hunt buck beds or any bedding areas at all? Absolutely.
But it's hard. It extremely difficult to hunt a bedding area. I mean, to hunt in a bedding area with bow and arrow. You just can't get close enough. But with a rifle, absolutely. One of my favorite ways of hunting a thicket, let's just say I've got a swamp, a wet area nearby that I can get to. And let's say that swamp is 60 acres. Well, I may take during the summer months when it's dry enough you can get in there, I'll take a D5 Caterpillar and push me out a straight lane, kind of looks like a road, that runs northwest to southeast through that thicket. And then I put a shooting house on the southeast end of that shooting lane, and it may be, say, 350 yards long. Then when it comes hunting season, I wait for the first day that's got a cold, clear, windy day, northwest wind, 25, 30, 35, 40 miles per hour, the faster the better. I get in that shooting house, put my gun out the window, brace it into place with a set of sandbags, push the safety off, lean back, pour some coffee, eat a cookie, and wait.
I like that. Sounds like... Yep.
What'll happen is deer in that thicket will tend to start moving around all times during the day. And they'll cross that shooting lane. It's not but about 15 feet wide. And when they do, you already got the gun ready. All you have to do is just lean forward, put the crosshair in him, and pull the trigger. You may not have but 10 seconds to shoot as he's crossing that lane, because he'll just come up, stick his head out, look one way or the other, and then walk across. So you don't get much of an opportunity, and you have to pay attention. But it is an extremely successful way to hunt thickets.
Well, you've been very gracious with your time, and this has been a fascinating conversation on my end. I have really enjoyed it, and maybe we can get you on again sometime. But could you tell the listeners how they might contact you if they want to get your book?
As I mentioned earlier, the publisher of my book went bankrupt, out of business, and so the book is at least temporarily off the market. But the title of the book's easy to remember. It's just the word Whitetails, plural, Whitetails. And so you can contact me at bobsheppard.com. Sheppard spelled a little funny. Bob, Sheppard, bobsheppard.com. And I'm going to get the book republished by another publisher. So it may take me a few weeks to get that done. So you can kind of touch base from that website. And there's an email link on there as well, so you can contact me that way if you're interested.
And we'll link everything in our show notes on our website. That way any listeners can go and they can find you there and be easy to find.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. I enjoy it, as you would guess, talking about hunting. It's something I've spent a lifetime doing, and I enjoy it.
Well, I've enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Very good. Take care.
Have a good night. You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Adam, I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed that interview. What do you think, and what do you think you're going to take away from it?
A couple of takeaways. I'm definitely going to start hunting having some midday sits. I'd already kind of thought about doing that prior to, this season, back in the summer, different planning that I was doing. I'm actually thinking about driving up to some places. It's about 2.5 hour drive from my house, and thinking of leaving around 8 o'clock. As soon as I get there, they put me to midday hunt, and instead of getting down, just hunt the rest of the day through. So Dr. Bob really kind of planted that one in my mind that I want to try this out. And the second thing would be hunting on windy days, something I've never really gave much consideration to. If the wind was blowing really hard, a lot of times I would just sit at home and say it wasn't worth it. The deer is going to win me. The deer aren't. I'd always had the preconceived notion that on really windy days, deer bed down. And so I think Dr. Bob has probably disproved that with all the journaling and the deer hunting that he has compiled. So those are my two takeaways. How about you?
I think the biggest thing is just the way he rehashed over the optimal conditions. And I said during the interview that, I kind of hunt when I can, but sometimes maybe during the week or something like that, there might be a time where I could squeeze in a hunt if I'm willing to drive quite a bit. And I definitely would want to, if it's like those perfect conditions, it sounds like that might be a time that I should go ahead and do that. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway. That, and just hearing somebody that's so analytical about deer hunting it's really interesting to hear about, how many things that we can be thinking about, those things that keep you awake at night, just thinking about different possibilities and what you should do. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's refreshing to talk to someone like Dr. Bob, who really gets into it, analyzes the data, pays attention to what's going on around him, not just posting on Facebook, like some kind of negative Nancy, I'm not hunting this day because the moon's not at the very right position, and all this other nonsense I get tired of hearing.
Well, I think there's like so much more I want to ask him about. I just think with all of the experience he has, with all of the deer that he's killed, and I guess you'll have to buy the book if you want to hear what the real number was. But he's got to have a ton of experience with blood trailing, just understanding deer behavior, having seen and been around so many deer in a hunting situation. I think there's a lot more that I'd like to ask him about.
I agree. I think we should definitely have him on very soon. If we can get him on in the next couple of months, it'd be good.
So, if I don't know what you guys talked about at the end of the podcast, because unfortunately I had a PTA meeting I had to get to, so I dropped off the line. But if you want to get his book, before we started recording, he mentioned he had about 50 copies, personally. He said there's some on eBay that are like $200 some just because there's only a couple left, and that's what people do. I've got a copy myself. If you want to pay me, say $150, I'll cut the Amazon price. I'll cut you a deal on it. But he also said he had some. So if you want to email him direct, you probably could get a copy of his book. You might want to get on it fast, though, because with all of our listeners, at least 5 or 6 million of you, you're going to have to beat those people out for those 50 copies.
There's definitely only going to be 49 available by the time this hits the streets.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting one.
Yeah, I've got to get a hold of mine. My dad said he had seen it somewhere. So who knows? So I got.
Did you just move out?
Yeah.
Have you been living in your parents' attic?
I'm 37 now. I moved out when I was 36. Yes. Anyway, thanks for everybody that's given us reviews, by the way. We haven't been bribing anybody with coffee or anything, and people are still leaving reviews, which really helps us. We've been moving up the iTunes or Apple Podcast rankings. I think due to a bunch of people subscribing and downloading. So if that's all you've done, thank you for that. But those people that have gone the extra mile, it helps out extra that we have those reviews as well. So thanks again, everybody. Adam, you got any final words?
Oh, man, just kind of adding on to that, us Southerners stick together. Just keep on subscribing and keep on downloading. We appreciate it.
Yeah, kid, help us know that making a Southern podcast is worthwhile. Share it with your friends and stuff. I've had other people tell me, man, you're really limiting your audience. Are you sure you want to do just a Southern podcast? And I'm confident this is a thing to do. I think we got the right audience. I think we've got a product that's good for you no matter where you live. But it's kind of cool to have something specifically for us Southerners too. So thanks for all your support. Keep spreading the word. And we're out down south.
We're out down south.